And what is going on, everyone? And welcome to this Friday edition of Houston Texans football on Bleacher Report. I am one part of your show, Ruben Calavillo, joined by the man himself, Mr. Hardy Dugan at TheLead _ on YouTube. How's it going, bro?
Doing all right, man. Another day, another off season for the Houston Texans.
Yeah, unfortunately, they are not going to be playing in the big game in just a couple of days. Before we get to that, man, big shout out to Bleacher Report allowing us to come on here. Always a big shout out to the man upstairs. Yes, dude, the Houston Texans, they are still trying to get to their first ever Super Bowl appearance, their first ever AFC Championship
Mhm.
appearance. Yes, they got a long way to go. We're going to cap off end the 2024 season for the Houston Texans as the 2024 season concludes on this Sunday in the Super Bowl matchup between the Kansas City Chiefs and the Philadelphia Eagles. Let's just start off with the big question. Harley, was 2024 a success for the Houston Texans?
Uh, yes and no,
Hmm.
and because there's always context with everything. But if you asked me before the season, like, hey, the Houston Texans are only going to end in the divisional round and they're going to lose to the Kansas City Chiefs, I'm going to say it was an unsuccessful season considering what you added in the offseason, considering the hype that this team was entering into the 2024 season. But when you add context, because there's context needed for everything,
Mm.
and you're telling me that an offense that was just riddled with poor offensive line play from the beginning to the end of the season got all the way to the divisional game, the same place they ended up last year, and only had the same wide receivers that were playing basically from last year's playoff game, I would say that's a pretty successful season considering all the surrounding factors. So, again, it's more of a yes and no for me.
Mm. I would disagree. And, it's the context, that kind of pulls me in the direction where, yes, this season was successful.
Mm-hmm.
You look at the amount of injuries you had during this season for the
Yeah.
offense. Stephon Diggs tore his ACL against the Buffalo Bills. Tank Dell, the lower leg injury suffered against the Kansas City Chiefs. Nico Collins missed about a month worth of football.
Mm-hmm.
Joe Mixon missed about a month worth of football. Brevin Jordan tore his ACL out for the season. That's your top six options all missing significant football time. Dalton Schultz missed time as well. Yet this offense was able to, I don't want to say get it going, but they were able to limp on with the way
Yeah.
this defense was playing. They were able to only give you 20 to 23 points because you knew your defense was so good at turning over the football and getting to the quarterback. They can close out a game for you. So
Mm-hmm.
it's just we have to look into that the context shows that the offense had so many injuries from the offensive line to the skill position, and you add in the regression in not only quarterback CJ Stroud but offensive coordinator Bobby Slowick. He's now fired, man. You have to tie that all into the conversation.
Yeah, you do. I mean, it is what it is. This Texans 2024 season, as we all know, didn't fall successfully the way we wanted it to. Um, and that's just the luck of the draw, man. And this is how a season goes for you. Unfortunately, you were expecting bigger and better things for this team. Nobody thought, and I don't even think the Texans knew that this offensive line was going to play like this.
Mm.
The amount of injuries that hurt you as well. But at the end of the day, your O line has to play better. Like that. That's what ultimately hurt this season because even with the injuries, if your offensive line played better, you would have had a more successful year. You would have had a better year from CJ Stroud, which his play regressed because of it. And so, it was fair to call it a sophomore slump at the end of the day. And we'll see what year three has in store for him. This man did not participate in the Pro Bowl or any of the activities.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems obvious that he's trying to get his mind right. And he admitted that maybe he, thought it was a little too easy. He admitted to the mistakes of thinking this was going to be a little too easy for him this year. He admitted it. He admitted to that in the exiting press conference when they were cleaning out their lockers. And so he throws a lot of the blame to himself as well, like any leader would.
Mm.
So CJ Stroud definitely has to play better next year, and I expect him to play better next year.
And that's what brings me to my question, and great segue by you. Did 2024 CJ Stroud change your mind whether or not he is the franchise quarterback for this Houston Texans team? For a lot of fans, that decision did change. Not only did his play regress, and you mentioned it, you brought up the term sophomore slump. It was that bad, for CJ Stroud. The moment after Tank Dell gets injured, him crying on the sideline, showing his emotions, that threw off a lot of fans. Me personally, I think CJ Stroud, I think he had some growing pains this year. And I
Mhm.
think you saw his final two games in the playoffs. You saw him kind of mature into that quarterback. In no way, shape, or form am I moving away from the idea that that he is the franchise guy. But I think year two, left a lot to be desired for some people.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you. To basically summarize CJ Stroud's season, there was fragments,
Mm,
a lot of fragments, incomplete sentences when it comes to CJ Stroud's full year. Because when you're looking at it, there is moments and there's glimpses where you go, there it is.
mm,
That's the quarterback that we're used to. That's the type of play we're used to. When you saw the Chargers game, it's what gave you hope for the Chiefs game because that hope came from number 7, creating a disastrous
mm.
play between him and Jared Patterson and the ball going over. And you're thinking, oh man, it's not looking good right now. And CJ Stroud gets that ball, runs near the out of bounds, flings a pass to Hutchinson for a first down, and the offense never stopped. And that is what is creating this hope that CJ Stroud can still be a franchise quarterback. Personally, I never needed that hope.
Mm.
I know this guy's a franchise quarterback. We've seen him make play after play after play. It was inconsistent this year. Yes, you can talk about how, bad quarterback play it was this year from him. There's contributing factors, obviously, as to why, but ultimately, you have to take on the responsibility as a leader. And I thought press interview, his exit interview was him taking that leadership and saying, "Yeah, I didn't play good. Yeah, I probably, admitting to, oh, okay, yeah, I probably took this season lightly, considering how easy it was as a rookie. I get it. That's just the human in him, and that's the human in all of us. If anything comes easy to us, we're gonna think, oh man, can't wait for that next year.
Yeah.
That's just how it is. So I appreciate his honesty, and I fully expect CJ Stroud to do his thing, get into the offseason, work extensively, and get back next year with a new OC, a better quarterback.
Yeah, man, I can't wait to see what a locked in CJ Stroud looks like, right? And I like that
Mhm.
him, as you mentioned in his final press conference, he did bring up, he was kind of the face of the NFL for a while. The NFL sent him and Micah Parsons, across the world to show out in Japan and all the podcasts he was on, the podcast with Tank. So like that he got his moment in the lights, and then once again, you quickly find out that you have to work to stay in those lights. You have to work to stay getting those podcast interviews. So, year three, CJ Stroud locked in. I am excited to see. The biggest failure was the offensive line, and I think this is the area where we see the most movement in free agency in the draft, right? I give the performance for the offensive line a F. Laramie Tunsil, I don't care what anyone says. I don't care how many false starts he gives me. I know that I am going to get elite pass protection when he is there on Sunday. I don't think he's going anywhere. What do you say?
No, I don't think he's going anywhere either. It's the other four that you have more questions and more, concerns about.
Mm. Left guard, only if Titus Howard agrees to restructure his deal do I see him on this offensive line this season.
That's tough, man, because personally I would rather improve at left guard. I would look elsewhere.
Trade him
And that
away.
and I mean if that's what it comes down to, whether it's trading him away or whatever it is, ultimately I don't think that happens considering that they gave him a contract just what 2 years ago
Mm-hmm.
or just last year. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I would be very intrigued to see what happens with him because I need a left guard. The Texans know they need a left guard. Okay, damn it, they need a guard. They need one. Now, when you're looking at right tackle, which was his natural position, do you want to roll it back with Titus Howard at right tackle,
No.
or did you really like what Blake Fisher showed you as a rookie? And if we're being completely honest, it didn't feel like much of a difference.
No.
And so that gives you the hope that, man, we can free up some money and save something here by possibly getting rid of Titus Howard and moving in a different direction at guard and now right tackle.
I want to see what type of value Titus Howard has, but that's why I said the only way I see him on his offensive line is at left guard, and is if he does take that pay cut.
Yeah.
Center, this is where I kind of get discouraged because I think it's either going to be Juice Scruggs or Jared Patterson, and I'm leaning more towards Juice Scruggs here. I feel like they're going to try to run it back again.
And see, there's a small part of me that's like, man, I don't know if that's gonna work. But then the bigger part of me is very optimistic about Nick Caley being the offensive coordinator and the combination between him, Cole Popovich,
Mm,
and just a new offensive line coach, really, because Cole Popovich is going to have more of a say. That it is his direct responsibility now. It's not just a heavy input in the run game. Now he is the offensive lines coach. It's something that he's been wanting to get for quite some time. Now you have that opportunity to showcase yourself. You better do a good job. He did a pretty well job in New England with Nick Caley, but they were just positional coaches and assistants. Now y'all have primary responsibility over the offense. How are y'all going to change this? If Juice Scruggs looks better with the right coaching, I think this could be a really good player for you going into next year. A very underrated player that people might scoff at when you mention Juice Scruggs. I think his natural position, as Nick Casario mentioned before, is the center position. He wants him to play the center position. So it's very interesting to see with Nick Caley, Cole Popovich, their combination. Does
mhm.
Juice Scruggs play better now because he's got some new coaching? That's what we're really looking at.
Right guard, this is where I think for sure we see someone new starting. I think Shaq Mason, I think it's done. I think the Houston Texans are going to find a way out of the Shaq Mason experiment. And we've already seen, some mock drafts for the Houston Texans select Alabama guard Tyler Booker at
Yes.
at the guard spot to fill in the right spot. So I for sure think we are going to have a new right guard this season.
Completely agree with you. I can't see a world where Shaq Mason is back on this team.
It would hurt me
They
if he is.
And if he is, then they are just banking. They are solely confident that Nick Caley and Cole Popovich are going to turn Shaq Mason back around into being a Pro Bowl guard. And I'm just not quite sure he can do that again. I'm
Mm.
not. I don't think he could. I wished he would. I wished. I really
What
do.
if
But
they
I'm
do
just
that old training camp competition, Shaq Mason starting, Tyler Booker is the backup at right guard.
That makes a lot of sense because that's just typical NFL coaches. That's just the typical NFL kind of, write up. Like
Mhm.
you have your guard still in Shaq Mason, you got Tyler Booker, and or whoever fill in the blank guard that you drafted, and we'll see what happens there. I know Tyler Booker's the guy that keeps continue to be drafted over here amongst the fan base. Matt Miller had him in his mock draft on ESPN Plus, so don't mind it at all. But I need somebody new at right guard. I need somebody new.
And then our right tackle, I mean, I don't think there's going to be any debate. We want to see Blake Fisher there. I think he played good for you in his time at right tackle, had some good moments in the postseason, showed up for you. And like you said, there was no difference between him and Titus Howard. And for Blake Fisher being a rookie, that's a good thing. I think there's a bright future ahead of him. And I think now it's his moment at the right tackle spot going forward.
For sure. I think this is his opportunity to showcase that I can be the starting right tackle for the Houston Texans. It'd be very interesting to see what happens between him and Titus Howard
Hmm.
because Titus, got extended here to be a right tackle. So I do wonder what happens with Titus and Blake Fisher and what kind of saga we have there. But ultimately, I don't mind Blake Fisher, and I hope they prefer to stick him at right tackle.
Ooh, same. Tight end spot. Dawson Schultz. Now, entering this season, Dawson Schultz, he signed a 3-year, $30+ million deal to return to the Houston Texans to, be the Houston Texans' main tight end for the foreseeable future. Unfortunately, man, this was just not the season for Dawson Schultz. I mean, stats wise, still, when you look at it, you'll see about 500 yards. You'll see, multiple touchdowns. Hardly he ended the season with 532 yards, two tutties, and numbers wise, you're thinking, okay, that's kind of respectable for a tight end. But year one, Dalton Schultz, and year two, Dalton Schultz were two entirely different things. You go back in the Tampa Bay game in year one, where CJ Stroud had the amazing comeback. Dalton Schultz had 100 yards that game. There were multiple games where you felt the presence of Dalton Schultz against the Atlanta Falcons. He almost had the game-winning touchdown into the defense, messed it up at the end. This season with Dalton Schultz, it was always we were debating whether or not he wanted to be out there. A lack of effort is what we were talking about. But year two of Dalton Schultz here was not good.
To say the least, it was not good. He's an unwilling blocker, and in order to play with the Los Angeles Rams, in order to play on their team, just Sean McVay and the rest of that offense in general, you need a blocking tight end. You need a tight end that's at least willing to block. I'll say that. And Dalton Schultz does not have that willingness to block. He's completely lazy in that department, I'll add. But it's annoying, but ultimately your hope is that Nick Caley can bring out that rookie year Stroud to Schultz connection again. That's ultimately what you're hoping he can bring out from Dalton Schultz. And what gave him that 3-year extension was just that connection that him and CJ had. And it definitely felt like CJ has something more than a connection with Dalton Schultz, just not on the field, but off the field as well. He talked very highly of him off the field in press conferences as well. So, considering that, consider Nick Caley being the new OC. Hopefully, Dalton Schultz can get back to what he's used to doing, and that's being just a pretty serviceable, solid tight end for you. Will I bank on it? maybe not.
Mm. Outside of Dawson Schultz, I mean, I don't feel, comfortable headed into this season, right? Because Kate Stover entering year two, does that excite me? Not a lot. Brevin Jordan coming off of an ACO, does that excite me? Not a lot. I'm not high on Brevin Jordan. I know a lot of Houston Texans fans are, but I definitely think one needs to be addressed via the NFL draft. You already spent the money, so how about you spend some late round draft capital and one? I think a lot of fans have already mock drafted one from Miami, to
Yeah.
the Houston Texans. But I think the tight end spot is somewhere where I think the Houston Texans can invest in.
Yeah, I could agree with that. I'm a little higher on Brevin Jordan than you. I
Okay.
like Brevin Jordan. I like what he can bring. I think the biggest knock on Brevin Jordan is just staying healthy.
Yeah.
And I think that's what a lot of fans are really in on when it comes to Brevin Jordan is just the health factor. As long as he can stay healthy and he can produce a year, especially with this new offense, it feels like Brevin Jordan's excited to work with Nick Caley, considering he immediately tweeted out those sunglass emojis, with a little
Hmm.
happy face. So definitely feels like he's hoping to, you know, work in this offense and be fully healthy. That's the big thing for him. And then Kate Stover, I mean, we'll see. He's a rookie. He's okay, nothing too flashy or anything, but we'll see what he can do year two.
And then as we move to the next group, right, the wide receiver spot, once again, it was just Nico Collins at the end.
Yep.
Stephon Diggs, let's talk about that experiment. I liked what Stephon Diggs brought on and off the field. He was a leader. He was not a locker room cancer. When we were at training camp, we saw him work with wide receivers after practice, guys who didn't even make the 53-man roster and, are no longer in the NFL. On the play, he was a a third down machine and had a connection with CJ Stroud. Unfortunately, we know how it ended with a torn ACL. I just don't know if I want to bring Stephon Diggs back. I know how much money we have tied into him. I just don't know if I want to do that again.
It's tough. We can waffle all day about Stephon Diggs, but I think I'm leaning more towards bringing him back. And I just believe that even though he was hurt last year and he had a pretty bad injury, he's been an Iron Man for the majority of his career, and his intangibles, like you mentioned, is just something you can't have. You can never have enough of. And Stephon Diggs was completely the opposite of a cancerous guy or any sort of detriment to this team, or else he would have been gone because we saw it
Hmm.
with Deontay Johnson. You don't want to be here, you don't want to play, you're upset, you get off the team immediately. And so you can tell D'Amico Ryans doesn't put up with it, and Stephon Diggs ain't about it. He's about the game and he's about getting his and making sure that the team wins. And that's ultimately what we were doing when Stephon Diggs was healthy.
Facts.
So yeah, I would like to see more of it. I think that's just a really good duo to have. At the very
Mhm.
least, you could have Nico Collins and Stephon Diggs. To me, that's not a bad duo at all. Obviously, you can add some more, whether in free agency or even the draft. I don't mind them even double dipping. Um, when you look at the rest of the wide receivers out there, it's an okay market free agency wise. You're not going to get a T Higgins. That's going to be top end of the market. That's too expensive. But I think Stephon Diggs off the injury kind of helps you financially,
Mm.
and maybe you do move into the direction of okay, we can have Nico Collins, Stephon Diggs. We're not going to have Tank Dell hypothetically for let's just say the whole year. We can fill in somebody else's spot by bringing in maybe a Tutu Atwell, maybe a Demarcus Robinson, maybe an Elijah Moore, Joshua Palmer. There's solid wide receivers out there that can fill out the rest of this depth chart.
Yeah, I think the wide receiver spot, man, needs to be heavily invested in. With Tank Dell, just some quick thoughts. Even before his injury, felt like we were waiting for that big Tank Dell game, and didn't feel like we didn't quite get it. Almost got it against the Kansas City Chiefs until unfortunately when no one we know what happened with the injury, but it didn't feel like I at all, man. And this is where we talk about how disappointing the offense was. We didn't feel like we had that legit 1, 2, 3 punch at the wide receiver spot, even when Stephon Diggs, Tank Dell, and Nico Collins were all healthy at the same time.
And when you talk about Tank Dell, I love Tank Dell, um, and I've ultimately chalked that up to Bobby Slowick just being misutilizing the wide receiver department
Mm.
as an OC. Because the reasons you did not see that 1, 2, 3, that five-headed monster that CJ Stroud once claimed that we had here in Houston, you never saw any glimpse of that five-headed monster. And a lot of that to blame for me is Bobby Slowick, because there is no way you utilize Tank Dell the first 4 weeks of the season as a gadget guy. That's all he
Mm.
used him as. The guy that did end rounds. That was basically it. He would just do end rounds and bubble screens when I'm looking at Tank Dell his rookie year and he's lining up outside as an X or Z or Y wide receiver. He can line up anywhere on the field, cook up opposing DBs with his routes, and he was making big time play after big time play. That's what we missed last year. Now, yes, the offensive line doesn't necessarily help you to manufacture those big plays, but the offensive coordinator in Bobby Sorg formerly didn't do his end of the deal either by trying to incorporate these three wide receivers in better offensive concepts.
And this is that we hope with new OC Nick Kalen, we are able to see, more creativity with the skill players that we have. Outside of that, man, Robert Woods, thank you for everything you've done. Goodbye. Xavier Hutchinson, I think, should be fighting for a roster spot.
Yes,
I love what Hutch brings in terms of, blocking, and we could use him as a RB sometimes, but this is someone who needs to be fighting for his spot, man. The wide receiver group, it's, for the past 2 seasons towards the end, in terms of bodies, you got none. John Mechie, what are your thoughts on him?
chalk it up with the same way as Xavier Hutchinson. You got to be fighting for a roster spot.
Mm,
Like the both of them guys, they don't have no guaranteed spot. They have had their opportunities to show you something, and people can say, "Oh, well, what opportunity?" Well, you had injuries in the wide receiver department back to back years. In back to back years, you have not had any sort of splash plays or any sort of, oh man, Hutchinson or Mechie, man, I'm looking forward to them next year. Like, no one has ever left the season saying that. So because of it, you have a roster spot open for anybody, whether they want to fill it in with free agency or in the draft. I have no problem with it, and I don't have a problem with them bringing them back either.
mm.
But I do think that they need to be fighting for that roster spot.
Damian Pierce, fighting for a roster spot?
Depends, because the new scheme, as we're learning, could benefit Damian Pierce heavily. We'll see how that goes, but at the moment, yes, he should be fighting for a roster spot.
And then we know veteran Joe Mixon, man, he's gonna be doing his thing. No,
Yeah,
I would love a legit backup running back. We, didn't get quite the 1-2 punch we thought we were gonna have with Joe Mixon, Damian Pierce,
for
but there
sure.
were moments where, where it was out there. So maybe under offensive coordinator Nick Caylor, we get to see the full power of this Houston Texan offense. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is going to wrap up today's edition of Houston Texans football on Bleacher Report. We went through the offense and gave you the season ending review. On Monday or on Wednesday, we'll talk about, um, the defensive side. But with that being said, guys, for more Houston Texans content, you guys know what to do. Feel free to follow us for more. Go Houston. Have a very blessed day.